Money has always had a strange way of revealing people's true colors, and maybe that's why I never flaunted my wealth openly, especially not to my wife, Sarah. To her, I was just Mark, her modest husband who worked as a financial consultant and lived well below our means. She never questioned where our comfortable lifestyle came from, assuming it was just careful budgeting and smart investments. Now, as I watch her pack her bags to leave with James Morrison, her successful boss, I can't help but smile at the irony. The man she's leaving me for doesn't realize that I own 47% of his company's shares. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For context, I'm what you might call a silent investor, someone who prefers to work behind the scenes, letting my money speak through careful investments and strategic planning. I built my fortune through years of calculated risks and patient decision-making, always keeping a low profile. When I met Sarah 5 years ago, I was already worth more than most people make in several lifetimes, but I never saw the need to lead with that information. You see, when we first started dating, I was drawn to Sarah's apparent authenticity. She worked as a marketing executive at Morrison Technologies, a mid-sized tech company that had potential but needed proper funding to grow. She was passionate about her work, ambitious, and seemed to value substance over status. I fell in love with her genuine smile, her drive, and what I thought was her unpretentious nature. During our courtship and early marriage, I maintained my modest appearance. Our house, while comfortable, wasn't flashy. Our cars were practical rather than luxurious. I wanted our relationship to be built on something real, not the artificial attraction that wealth often creates. Sarah never complained about our lifestyle, at least not at first. We had everything we needed, and then some, but we weren't living the kind of lavish life that my wealth could have afforded us. What Sarah didn't know was that 2 years before we met, I had already invested heavily in Morrison Technologies. I saw potential in their business model, but more importantly, I recognized that with proper funding and guidance, the company could become something significant. James Morrison, the CEO, never met me in person. All our dealings were handled through intermediaries and my investment firm. I preferred it that way. It allowed me to maintain my anonymity while still having a significant say in major company decisions. The irony of Sarah working for a company I partially owned wasn't lost on me, but I saw no reason to disclose this information. Our lives were separate from our work, or so I thought. I never imagined that this separation would eventually lead to the unraveling of our marriage. Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle changes in Sarah's behavior sooner. It started about a year ago, when James Morrison began taking a more active role in day-to-day operations. Sarah would come home talking about him with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in her for a while. At first, I dismissed it as professional admiration. After all, from her perspective, he was a successful CEO who had built his company from the ground up. "You should see how he runs meetings, Mark," she'd say, her eyes lighting up. "He's so confident, so decisive. The company's grown so much under his leadership." Little did she know that many of those successful decisions she attributed to James were actually influenced by my input through the board of directors. I listened to her praise of James with a mixture of amusement and growing concern. The amusement came from knowing the full picture, that her boss's success was partly due to my investment and guidance. The concern stemmed from recognizing the subtle shift in how she viewed our life together. Sarah started making small comments about our lifestyle, comparing it to the way James lived. "Did you know James just bought a summer house in the Hamptons?" Or "James drives the new Tesla Model S. He says it's important to project success." Each comment felt like a tiny needle, testing my skin, probing for a reaction. I maintained, My composure, staying true to my beliefs about wealth and its display. We're comfortable, I'd say. Isn't that enough? But I could see the disappointment in her eyes, the growing disconnect between her aspirations and what she thought I could provide. The real change came 6 months ago, when Sarah was promoted to head of marketing. It was a position she deserved, based on her skills, but I knew, through my position as a major investor, that James had specifically pushed for her promotion. In board meetings, attended through my proxy representatives, I had to sit silently while James praised Sarah's potential. Knowing his interest wasn't purely professional. Sarah's late nights at the office became more frequent. Emergency meetings, project deadlines, client dinners, the excuses piled up like autumn leaves. I noticed the subtle changes in her appearance. New designer clothes, expensive perfume, a different hairstyle. She said they were necessary for her new position to match the company's image. I knew better, but I said nothing. Through my network of connections within the company, I received occasional reports about Sarah and James being seen together outside of work hours. Private dinners, weekend conferences, lengthy closed-door meetings. I could have stopped it all with a single phone call, exercised my power as a major investor to have James removed or Sarah transferred. But I wanted to see how far this would go, to understand if what we had built together meant anything at all. Tonight, as I sit in my home office, watching through the security cameras as Sarah packs her bags in our bedroom, I realize that my experiment in authenticity has reached its conclusion. She hasn't told me she's leaving yet, but I know she will. The resignation letter she submitted to HR today, which landed on my proxy's desk within hours, tells me everything I need to know. I check my phone and see a text from her. "We need to talk when you get home." Little does she know I'm already here, watching our marriage's final act unfold through digital eyes. I take a sip of my whiskey and allow myself a small smile. Sometimes the greatest power lies not in what you do, but in what you choose not to do. The question now isn't whether I'll reveal my true position. It's when and how this revelation will have the most impact. The stage is set, the players are in position, and soon, very soon, both Sarah and James will learn that appearances can be deceiving. But for now, I'll wait patiently in my office, preparing myself for the conversation that will set everything in motion. The tension in our house had become almost tangible over the past few months. Every creak of the floorboards, every silent dinner, every avoided glance told its own story. I found myself spending more time in my home office, ostensibly working on financial consultations, but in reality I was monitoring the increasingly concerning developments at Morrison Technologies. Through my secure investment portal, Sarah's behavior had shifted from subtle discontent to barely concealed disdain. The way she looked at me now reminded me of someone staring at a painting they'd once admired, but had grown tired of. Familiar, yet disappointing. Our conversations, once flowing naturally like a peaceful stream, had become forced and mechanical, punctuated by long silences and heavy sighs. "Mark," she said one evening, picking at her barely touched dinner, "don't you ever wonder if there's more to life than this?" She gestured vaguely around our modestly furnished dining room. "We're in our 30s and we're living like we're fresh out of college." I took a measured sip of water, suppressing the urge to tell her about the offshore accounts that could buy our house 100 times over. "What's wrong with living within our means?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "We have everything we need." She put down her fork with more force than necessary. "Needs aren't enough anymore, Mark. Look at the people I work with. They're all moving forward, growing, achieving things. James just opened a new branch in Singapore, and here we are, still driving the same car we bought 3 years ago. The irony of her mentioning the Singapore branch wasn't lost on me. I had personally approved that expansion during a confidential board meeting 2 months ago over James's initial hesitation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His presentation had been shaky at best, but I saw the potential in the Asian market. Now he was taking credit for my business acumen, using it to impress my wife. Success isn't always about external signs of wealth, Sarah, I replied, maintaining my calm demeanor. Some of the wealthiest people I know live very modestly. She laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh I'd fallen in love with. It was sharp, almost mocking. Oh, and you know so many wealthy people in your little consulting job. Please, Mark, don't pretend you're some financial guru. I see real success every day at work. I know what it looks like. If she only knew that her real success was built on my investment decisions, the company's recent growth, the expansions, the technological advancements, all of them had required my approval and funding. I was the invisible hand guiding Morrison Technologies' success, while James Morrison was merely the public face. Our evenings fell into a predictable pattern. Sarah would come home late, usually smelling of expensive restaurants and wearing clothes that certainly weren't bought with her marketing executive salary. She'd briefly mention meetings with clients or strategy sessions, but I noticed how she'd light up whenever she mentioned James's name. James thinks we should restructure the entire marketing department, she'd say, or James believes we need to be more aggressive in our approach. James. He had become the center of her professional universe, and increasingly her personal one too. Through my investment firm's surveillance, I received regular updates about their business dinners and strategic meetings. Photos would appear in my secure email. Sarah and James at high-end restaurants, their heads close together over wine glasses, entering his Tesla late at night, leaving weekend strategy sessions at luxury hotels. Each image was like a paper cut, small but stinging. I could have confronted her, shown her the evidence, demanded explanations, but I held back, partly out of curiosity about how far this would go, and partly because I wanted to understand if our marriage had ever been real, or if I had just been a comfortable placeholder until something more exciting came along. One Saturday morning, I was in my office reviewing some actual consulting work. I maintained this job as a cover, and I was good at it, when Sarah entered without knocking. She was dressed for the office, despite it being a weekend. Emergency meeting. At work, she said, not meeting my eyes. James needs the whole team to prepare for the Tokyo presentation next week. I knew for a fact there was no Tokyo presentation. The Asian expansion plans were still in their early stages, nowhere near requiring marketing input. On a Saturday? I asked mildly, watching her fidget with her car keys. That's what successful companies do, Mark. They don't wait for Monday to solve problems. Her tone was defensive, almost challenging. Some of us actually care about career growth. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. The designer outfit, the carefully applied makeup, the nervous energy, none of it was for a business meeting. And James will be there, I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She stiffened slightly. Of course he will. He's the CEO. He's always there when important decisions need to be made. I nodded slowly, remembering the board meeting last week where James had appeared via video call from his beach house, clearly hungover and unprepared. The other board members had looked to my proxy for guidance, as they always did. Well, don't let me keep you from your important meeting. She hesitated for a moment, perhaps detecting something in my tone, but then turned and left without another word. Through my security feed, I watched her get into her new car, a recent company perk that I knew James had arranged personally. Later that evening, I received the usual surveillance photos. Sarah and James at his beach house. Definitely. Not in any business meeting. They were walking on the beach, his hand on the small of her back, her head thrown back in laughter. It was the happiest I'd seen her look in months. The pain I felt wasn't from jealousy, it was from disappointment. I had given Sarah the chance to know me, the real me, without the distraction of wealth and power. I had hoped she would love the man, not the trappings of success. But watching her fall for James's borrowed success, seeing her choose the illusion over substance, made me realize how wrong I had been. That night, as I sat alone in our too-quiet house, I began formulating a plan, not out of vengeance or spite, but out of a need for truth. Sarah had made her choice based on a carefully constructed facade, both mine and James's. Soon, both of those facades would crumble, and the truth would emerge like a flower breaking through concrete. Beautiful, but destructive. I poured myself a glass of the same whiskey I'd been saving for our 5th anniversary, a $12,000 bottle that Sarah had assumed was a $50 replica, and began making calls to my financial team. It was time to start moving pieces on the board. After all, in both business and life, timing is everything. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Sarah thought she was trading up for a more successful man, she was actually trading down, way down. James Morrison, for all his flashy displays of wealth, was leveraged to the hilt. His beach house, the Tesla, the designer suits, all of it was built on corporate loans and creative accounting that only my consistent investment kept afloat. A house of cards that I could topple with a single phone call, but patience had always been my greatest virtue. I would wait, watch, and let events unfold at their own pace. Sometimes the greatest power lies in knowing when not to use it. The catalyst that finally shattered our fragile facade came on what started as an ordinary Thursday evening. I had spent the day in a series of actually important meetings, not with my supposed consulting clients, but with my investment firm's board, discussing Morrison Technology's increasingly concerning financial decisions. James had been taking bigger risks, leveraging company assets for personal expenses, all while presenting a picture of success to the employees and shareholders. Arrived home earlier than usual, the weight of the day's revelations heavy on my mind. Through my position as a major investor, I had just learned that James had authorized substantial bonuses for certain executives, including a particularly generous one for Sarah, without proper board approval. The money trail led to some questionable accounts, and my financial team had flagged several irregularities. The house was quiet when I entered, but Sarah's car was in the driveway. As I approached our bedroom, I heard her voice, speaking in hushed but excited tones. The door was slightly ajar, and against my better judgment, I stood there, listening to my wife plan the end of our marriage. "Yes, James, I understand." "No, he doesn't suspect anything. Of course, I'm sure about this. Yes, I've thought it through." Sarah's voice was different when she talked to him, lighter, almost girlish. "The Dubai position sounds perfect. Mark will never understand why I need this, but you do. You've shown me what real success looks like." I had to suppress a laugh at that moment. The Dubai expansion she was referring to, it was my latest investment project. James had initially opposed it, calling it too risky, until my proxy on the board had pushed it through. Now he was using it to lure my wife away from me. "I'll tell him tonight," Sarah continued, unaware of my presence. "He'll probably just sit there with that same passive expression he always has. Sometimes I wonder if he feels anything at all. Yes, I've already packed the essentials. The new apartment sounds wonderful. No, money won't be a problem. I've been saving the bonuses you arranged. Those bonuses, funded by my investment, arranged without proper authorization, and now being used to finance my wife's departure." The irony was almost poetic. I stepped away from the door and made my way to my home office. Opening my laptop, I pulled up the latest reports from my financial team. James's house of cards was already showing signs of strain. His personal expenses had spiraled out of control, and he'd been using company resources in increasingly questionable ways. All it would take was one gentle push, and the whole thing would come crashing down. But first, I wanted to hear what Sarah had to say. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and waited. 20 minutes later, she appeared in my office doorway, dressed in one of her new designer outfits, her expression set in determined lines. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but with an undertone of nervousness. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She sat down, smoothing her skirt with manicured fingers. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about my life, my career, our marriage." "Have you?" I kept my voice neutral, taking a sip of whiskey. "Yes, and I've come to realize that we want different things in life. You're content with this," she gestured around our modestly furnished home office. "But I want more. I need more." I set my glass down carefully. "And James Morrison can give you more?" Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly recovered. "This isn't about James. This is about me, my career. I've been offered an amazing opportunity, heading up the Dubai office. It's a chance I can't pass up." "Interesting," I said, opening a folder on my desk. "Tell me more about this Dubai office." "It's a major expansion for the company. James sees huge potential in the Middle Eastern market. He's putting together a strong team, and he thinks I'd be perfect to lead the marketing division there." A voice grew animated as she spoke about it, pride and excitement evident in every word. "And your relationship with James, is that strictly professional?" Her expression hardened. "My relationship with James isn't the issue here. He sees my potential, Mark. He understands ambition. He knows what it takes to be successful in today's world." I couldn't help but smile at that. "Does he now? And what exactly has James Morrison taught you about success?" "Don't do that," she snapped. "Don't sit there with that condescending smile. James built Morrison Technologies from nothing. He's a true entrepreneur, a visionary. What would you know about that kind of success? You're just a mid-level consultant who's afraid to take risks." The moment felt ripe. I could have revealed everything right then, shown her the documents proving my ownership, the reports detailing James's financial mismanagement, the surveillance photos of their not-so-professional meetings. But something held me back. I wanted to hear it all. "So you're leaving me for him?" I asked directly. "I'm leaving because I've outgrown this life," she said, standing up. James just helped me see what I was missing. He showed me what I'm truly worth." I picked up my whiskey glass again, studying the amber liquid. "And what exactly are you worth, Sarah?" "More than you could ever offer," she said coldly. "I've already packed my things. James has arranged an apartment for me until the Dubai position is finalized. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce." I nodded slowly. "You've thought of everything, haven't you? The apartment, the new job, the smooth transition. Tell me, does James's wife know about any of this?" Sarah's face paled slightly. That's being handled. They've been separated for months." Another lie. I had had dinner with James and his wife just last week at a board members' event. James had been playing both sides, selling dreams to my wife while maintaining his marriage for the sake of company appearance. "I see," I said quietly. "Well, don't let me keep you from your new life." She stood there for a moment, perhaps expecting more of a reaction. When I remained silent, she turned and walked to the door. "My lawyer will be in touch," she repeated. "Sarah," I called out just as she reached the doorway. She paused, looking back. "Just remember, sometimes things aren't quite what they seem." She gave me a pitying look. "No, Mark. Things are exactly what they seem. You're just too passive to see it." As her footsteps faded down the hallway, I pulled out my phone and sent a brief text to my financial team. "Begin Phase 1. The pieces were set, and the game was about to change dramatically. Sarah thought she was walking away from a simple, unsuccessful marriage into a life of luxury and success. She had no idea she was walking into a storm of my making. I heard the front door close, followed by the sound of her car starting. Through my security feed, I watched her drive away, her car loaded with suitcases, her face set with determination. Little did she know that her dream job in Dubai, like so much else in James Morrison's empire, was built on shifting sands. I finished my whiskey and began making calls. It was time to show both Sarah and James the true meaning of success and failure. The morning after Sarah left, I initiated what my financial team called the velvet squeeze, rather than an immediate dramatic move that would send Morrison Technologies into chaos. I began with subtle adjustments to my investment strategy. It was like watching a master chess player slowly constrict their opponent's options. Every move seemed innocent enough on its own, but together they formed an inescapable trap. I started my day as usual, arriving at my modest consulting office, a cover I'd maintained for years. But today was different. Today, I had my team begin implementing the carefully orchestrated plan we'd developed months ago when I first noticed the signs of James's financial mismanagement. My phone buzzed with a message from my chief financial advisor. First phase complete. Board meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. Morrison seems unaware of the funding freeze. I smiled, remembering Sarah's parting words about my supposed passivity. If she only knew the wheels that were already in motion. Through my security sources, I learned she had spent the night at the luxury apartment James had arranged for her. An apartment, ironically, in a building owned by one of my subsidiary investment companies. Around mid-morning, my phone lit up with a call from James Morrison himself. This was unusual. He normally only communicated with my proxy on the board. I let it go to voicemail, curious about what could be so urgent that he'd break protocol. Mr. Thompson, his message began, using my investment firm's proxy name. This is James Morrison. There seems to be some confusion with our latest funding round. The Dubai expansion requires immediate capital injection, and we're seeing unexpected delays. Please, call me back at your earliest convenience. I had my assistant return his call, maintaining the fiction of Mr. Thompson's busy schedule. Mr. Morrison will have to wait until the board meeting this afternoon, she informed his office. Mr. Thompson is currently in Singapore handling other investments. Meanwhile, I received another update from my surveillance team. Sarah had arrived at Morrison Technologies headquarters, dressed impressively in designer clothes that probably cost 3 months of her regular salary. She was glowing with confidence, unaware that her dream job in Dubai was already beginning to unravel. Through the company's internal communications, which I had access to as a major investor, I watched the morning unfold. James held an emergency meeting with his financial team, trying to understand why the promised funding for the Dubai expansion hadn't arrived. His CFO, who had been growing increasingly concerned about the company's financial decisions, was asking questions that James couldn't answer. At lunch, I received an interesting photo from my surveillance team. Sarah and James at an expensive restaurant, but the mood seemed tense. James was checking his phone constantly, his usual confident demeanor showing cracks. Sarah, still blissfully unaware, was talking animatedly, probably about her plans for Dubai. I decided to take lunch at a small cafe across from Morrison Technologies. From my vantage point, I could see the growing activity in the offices above. People were moving with increased urgency, and through my sources I knew why. The company's credit lines were being quietly reviewed by the banks, another piece of my strategy falling into place. At 1:45 p.m., I received confirmation that all board members would be attending the emergency meeting. I had my proxy dial in from a secure location while I watched the proceedings through a private feed. James looked disheveled, his usual polished appearance showing signs of strain. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we've encountered some unexpected complications with our expansion plans. Our primary investor, Mr. Thompson, seems to be reconsidering his position." I watched through the feed as Sarah, sitting in on her first board meeting as the proposed head of Dubai operations, tried to maintain her composure. She was probably wondering why her fairy tale was suddenly hitting turbulence. The CFO's presentation was revealing. Without the expected funding, Morrison Technology's aggressive expansion plans were unsustainable. The company had over-leveraged itself, counting on my continued investment to cover increasingly risky decisions. James had been using company resources for personal expenses, including the apartment he'd arranged for Sarah. As the meeting progressed, I had my proxy raise pointed questions about financial irregularities, including the unauthorized bonuses. James started to sweat visibly, his explanations becoming less coherent. Sarah's expression shifted from confidence to concern, as she realized her dream job might not be as secure as she'd thought. After the meeting, I received another surveillance photo. James and Sarah in his office, having what appeared to be an intense discussion. Her body language had changed dramatically from lunch. Gone was the relaxed confidence, replaced by obvious tension. I decided it was time for the next phase. I had my team release a carefully worded statement to the board. Given recent discoveries of financial irregularities, Thompson Investments is conducting a thorough review of all funding commitments to Morrison Technologies. All pending investments are temporarily suspended. The effect was immediate. By late afternoon, the company's stock had started to dip as rumors of funding issues spread through the market. James's assistant was frantically trying to schedule meetings with other potential investors, but my team had already quietly warned them about the company's financial situation. Sarah, to her credit, tried to maintain a brave face. I watched through security feeds as she walked through the office, still playing the role of the soon-to-be Dubai executive. But I could see the uncertainty in her movements, the way she kept glancing at her phone, probably checking her bank balance and thinking about the expensive apartment she'd just committed to. As evening approached, I received one final photo. Sarah and James in the parking garage, their body language telling a very different story from just 24 hours ago. She was gesturing angrily, while he seemed to be on the defensive. The dream was already beginning to crack. I closed my laptop and headed home to my quiet house. On the kitchen counter, I noticed Sarah had left her house key and a note. "I hope someday you understand why I had to do this. You never had the ambition to give me the life I deserved." I placed the note in my office drawer, next to the folder containing evidence of all of James's financial misdeeds. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more unraveling of their carefully constructed plans. But for tonight, I allowed myself a small smile, knowing that sometimes the most effective revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own choices. The security system pinged, showing Sarah's car pulling up to the house. She sat there for several minutes, probably debating whether to come in. Finally, she drove away, back to her luxury apartment, an apartment that, unknown to her, would soon be part of a larger investigation into James's misuse of company funds. The game was just beginning, and I had all the pieces in place. Sarah wanted to see real success. She was about to learn what it truly meant to play in the big leagues. The next few days unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of corporate chaos. I watched from my various vantage points as Morrison Technologies began to show serious cracks in its gleaming facade. James's empire, built largely on my investment and inflated by his ego, was starting to crumble from the inside out. My phone buzzed constantly with updates from my financial team. The company's stock had dropped 15% in just 2 days as news of the funding freeze spread through the market. Major clients were getting nervous, and the ambitious Dubai expansion that had so enticed Sarah was now being scrutinized by increasingly skeptical board members. Through my surveillance network, I received regular updates about both James and Sarah. Their confident appearances were deteriorating rapidly. James had taken to arriving at the office unusually early and leaving late, his designer suits looking increasingly rumpled. Sarah, still clinging to her dreams of corporate glory, maintained her polished exterior, but I could see the strain in her expression in every surveillance photo. One particularly interesting image caught my attention. Sarah at the bank, apparently discovering that her recent bonuses, the ones James had arranged without board approval, were being frozen, pending investigation. Another showed her in an intense discussion with the leasing office of her luxury apartment. I smiled, knowing that the management company, owned by one of my shell corporations, was now reviewing all recent leases. "Sir," my assistant called, through the intercom of my consulting office, "there's a Mr. Morrison here to see Mr. Thompson. He doesn't have an appointment." I switched on my office security feed to see James pacing in the reception area, his usual swagger replaced by obvious anxiety. "Tell him Mr. Thompson is still in Singapore. He can schedule a proper appointment through the usual channels." Later, that afternoon, I received an urgent message from my board proxy. James had called an emergency executive meeting. Through the secure video feed, I watched him try to maintain control of an increasingly panicked leadership team. "The funding delay is temporary," he assured them, his confidence ringing hollow. "Thompson Investments is simply conducting routine reviews. Our Dubai expansion plans remain on track." Sarah sat in the corner, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing concern. She was probably wondering why her fairy tale was rapidly turning into a nightmare. The CFO, emboldened by the situation, began asking pointed questions about recent financial decisions, including the generous retention bonuses James had authorized. That evening, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. It was Sarah. "Mark," her voice had lost its recent condescending tone. I know this is awkward, but I need to talk to you about something." "What's on your mind?" I kept my voice neutral, curious about what had prompted this call. "It's about our joint account. I tried to access it today, but there seems to be some kind of hold." She paused, probably choosing her words carefully. "I know I don't have any right to ask, but I'm in a bit of a situation." I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "A situation? There's been some temporary complications at work, just some bureaucratic delays with my new position. I'm sure it will be sorted out soon, but in the meantime, you need money." I finished for her. "Just a short-term loan," she said quickly. "Once everything is sorted out with the Dubai position, I'll pay you back with interest." I allowed a moment of silence to stretch between us. "Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you say I was, and I quote, a passive nobody who would never understand real success? Wouldn't accepting my help be somewhat hypocritical?" "Mark, please. I know what I said was harsh, but this is just temporary. James says—" "Ah, yes, James," I interrupted. "Your visionary CEO. How is the Dubai expansion going?" Her silence spoke volumes. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but I don't think I'm in a position to help. Perhaps James can assist. After all, he's shown you what real success looks like, hasn't he?" After she hung up, I received another surveillance update. Sarah was in James's office, their discussion appearing heated. Through the company's internal communication system, I could see emails flying between departments. The Dubai office lease had fallen through. Key clients were putting contracts on hold, and the board was demanding a full audit of recent financial decisions. James's carefully constructed world was unraveling thread by thread. His personal credit lines were being reviewed, his assets were under scrutiny, and his wife, his actual wife, had just hired one of the city's top divorce attorneys. In fact that Sarah apparently was just discovering based on the office gossip. I decided to twist the knife a little further. I had my team release another statement to the board. Thompson Investments Review has uncovered potentially serious irregularities in recent financial transactions. A full audit is being initiated. The effect was immediate. By closing time, the company's stock had dropped another 12%. James was seen leaving the office looking defeated, his Tesla conspicuously replaced by an Uber. Sarah remained at her desk, staring at her computer screen, probably watching her dreams of corporate success dissolve in real time. Later that night, my security system alerted me to movement at the house. Sarah was back, sitting in her car in the driveway. Through the cameras, I could see her crying, mascara running down her cheeks. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy, but I reminded myself of her words, her actions, her choices. My phone buzzed with a message from my team. Phase 2, complete. Ready to proceed with final execution? I typed back a simple response. Not yet. Let them simmer a bit longer. The next morning, I arrived at my consulting office early. Sarah had finally left our driveway around midnight, but not before leaving. Another note. Mark, I know I don't deserve your help, but please, can we talk? Things aren't what they seemed. I placed this note with the first one, adding to what would become a collection of ironies. Through my various information channels, I learned that James had called an emergency meeting with his personal financial advisors. His wife had frozen their joint accounts. The board was asking uncomfortable questions about his expenses, and his carefully crafted image of success was cracking beyond repair. Sarah, meanwhile, was discovering that the corporate world she'd so admired was built on shakier foundations than she'd imagined. Her dream job was evaporating. Her luxury apartment was under review, and her new life was turning out to be far from what she'd envisioned. The stage was set for the final act, but timing was crucial. Sometimes the greatest impact comes not from the revelation itself, but from letting people stew in their own uncertainty just long enough to truly appreciate the magnitude of their mistakes. I closed my laptop and prepared to head home, knowing that tomorrow would bring even more unraveling of their carefully constructed plans. The truth about real success and real failure was about to become painfully clear to both of them. The unraveling continued at an accelerating pace. What had started as a controlled descent was quickly becoming a free fall for both Sarah and James. Morrison Technologies' stock had plummeted to historic lows, and rumors about financial mismanagement were spreading through the industry like wildfire. My phone had become a constant stream of desperate attempts at communication. Sarah's messages ranged from angry accusations to tearful pleas, while James, still unaware of my true identity, was frantically trying to reach Mr. Thompson through every available channel. One particularly revealing message from Sarah caught my attention. Mark, I know I've made terrible mistakes. James isn't who I thought he was. Can we please talk? I've been so blind. I was sitting in my consulting office reviewing the latest reports from my financial team when my assistant buzzed through. Sir, Mrs. Davidson is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. Through the security feed, I could see Sarah in the reception area, gone with the designer clothes and confident posture. She looked tired, defeated, wearing one of her old outfits from before her promotion. Send her in, I said after a moment's consideration. Sarah entered my office hesitantly, a far cry from the woman who had proudly announced her departure just days ago. Mark, she began, her voice shaky, thank you for seeing me. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. What can I do for you, Sarah? She sat down, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. Everything's falling apart, she said quietly. The Dubai position. It's not happening. The company's in trouble, and James... She trailed off. James isn't quite the successful visionary you thought he was? I supplied, keeping my voice neutral. Tears welled up in her eyes. He lied about everything. He's still married, did you know that? His wife found out about us and now she's divorcing him. The apartment he arranged for me, I'm being evicted because the payments weren't properly authorized. The bonuses he gave me are being investigated. I have nothing, Mark, nothing. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. That must be difficult. finding out that the success you admired wasn't real after all. "I've been so stupid," she whispered. "I threw away our marriage for an illusion. The things I said to you, I was wrong about everything." "Were you?" I asked mildly. "Wrong about everything or just wrong about James?" She looked up, confusion crossing her face. "What do you mean?" "You said I was passive, unsuccessful, afraid to take risks. Are you here because you've realized those things aren't true, or because your other option didn't work out?" Sarah flinched, as if I'd slapped her. "That's not fair. I'm trying to apologize." "Are you apologizing, Sarah, or are you looking for a safety net?" Before she could respond, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from my financial team. "Morrison attempting to liquidate company assets without board approval. Immediate action required." I held up a hand to pause Sarah's response. "Excuse me," for a moment. I typed a quick reply. "Proceed with containment protocol." Sarah watched me, her expression uncertain. "Mark, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but maybe we could try to work things out." "Start fresh?" Just then my assistant buzzed again. "Sir, Mr. Morrison is also here. He's quite insistent about seeing you." I checked the security feed to see James in the reception area, looking considerably less polished than usual. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. "Send him in," I said, curious to see how this would play out. James burst into my office, then stopped short when he saw Sarah. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "I could ask you the same thing," Sarah replied, her voice bitter. "Here to lie to my husband like you lied to me?" "Sarah, baby, everything I told you was true," James said quickly. "These are just temporary setbacks. Once I sort things out with the investors—" "Don't," Sarah cut him off. "Just don't. I know about your wife, James. I know about the company's problems. I know everything was a lie." I cleared my throat. "Mr. Morrison, what can I do for you?" James turned to me, seeming to remember why he was there. "Look, I know this is awkward, but I need to talk to you about Sarah's separation agreement. As her husband, you should know that the company's current situation is just temporary. Is that why you're trying to liquidate company assets without board approval?" I asked quietly. Both James and Sarah stared at me. "How do you know about that?" James asked, his face paling. I smiled for the first time since they'd entered my office. "I know a lot of things, James. For instance, I know that the Dubai expansion was never properly funded. I know about the unauthorized bonuses, the misappropriated company funds, the creative accounting you've been using to maintain your lifestyle." "Who are you?" James demanded, his confidence crumbling. "Someone who's been watching you very carefully," I replied. "Someone who doesn't appreciate how you've been mismanaging their investment." Sarah looked between us, confusion evident on her face. "Mark, what are you talking about? What investment?" I stood up slowly, straightening my tie. "Sarah, you wanted to know what real success looks like. Perhaps it's time for both of you to learn." I pressed a button on my desk phone. "Send them in, please." The office door opened, and two members of my financial team entered, carrying folders. "Mr. Davidson," one of them said, "the board is ready for your instructions regarding Morrison Technologies." James's face went completely white. "Davidson, you're Thompson." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as understanding began to dawn. "Mark," I smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. Sometimes success isn't about flash and appearance. Sometimes it's about patience, careful planning, and knowing exactly when to make your move. The look of absolute shock on both their faces was almost worth everything that had led to this moment. Almost. The revelation of my true identity landed like a bomb in my modest consulting office. James Morrison, the man who had seduced my wife, with borrowed success, stood frozen, his face a mask of dawning horror. Sarah, the woman who had dismissed me as passive and unsuccessful, sat speechless, her world turned upside down for the second time in as many weeks. "You're the major investor?" James finally managed to croak out. "All this time?" Thompson, Investments is just one of my many ventures, I replied calmly, organizing papers on my desk. Though I must say, Morrison Technologies has been one of the more interesting investments to watch. Sarah found her voice, though it trembled. So everything, the consulting job, our modest lifestyle, was a choice, I finished for her. A choice to live authentically, to build relationships based on substance, rather than appearance. I turned to my financial team. Please give us a moment. After they left, I sat back down, studying the two people who had betrayed me in different but equally disappointing ways. James looked like a man watching his life crumble in real time. Sarah appeared lost, as if the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. Why? Sarah whispered. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have made a difference? I asked quietly. Would knowing about my wealth have made you respect me more as a person? Would it have stopped you from falling for the illusion of success that James presented? James attempted to rally. Look, Mark, Mr. Davidson, we can work something out. The company has potential. With your continued investment, the company had potential, I corrected him, before you started using it as your personal piggy bank. Before you began making promises you couldn't keep and decisions you weren't qualified to make. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. This is a complete audit of your financial mismanagement. Unauthorized bonuses, personal expenses, charged to the company, misappropriated funds. It's quite a reading. James slumped in his chair, defeat written across his features. Sarah stared at him, then back at me, her expression a mixture of shock and something else, recognition perhaps of her own foolishness. The board meeting tomorrow will be interesting, I continued, especially when they learn about your attempt to liquidate company assets without approval. I wonder, James, did you think nobody would notice? I can explain, he began weakly. I'm sure you can. You've always been good at explanations, haven't you? Explaining to Sarah why you deserved her loyalty, explaining to your wife why you worked such late hours, explaining to the board why the company needed more funding. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. You know what's ironic? If you had focused on actually running the company instead of maintaining appearances, you might have succeeded. The market was there, the potential was real, but you were too busy playing the role of the successful CEO to actually be one. Sarah's voice broke the silence that followed. All this time, you were the one behind the company's growth, the expansions, the success. It was you, not James. I turned back to face them. Success isn't about appearing successful, Sarah. It's about building something real, something sustainable. It's about making decisions based on value, not vanity. James straightened in his chair, a desperate gleam in his eye. We can still salvage this. I'll step down as CEO, restructure the company. With your backing. My backing, I interrupted. My backing was contingent on competent management and ethical behavior. You've demonstrated neither. I pulled out another folder. The board has already been briefed. Tomorrow they'll vote. On new leadership, your resignation won't be necessary. The color drained from his face. You can't do this. I built this company. No, James, you were just the front man, and not a very good one at that. Sarah stood up suddenly. I should go. I need time to process all this. Of course, I replied. Though you might want to make arrangements for new accommodation. The apartment lease is being terminated due to improper authorization of company. You funds. She flinched but nodded. As she reached the door, she paused. I'm sorry, Mark. Not because of who you turned out to be, but because of who I turned out to be. After she left, James remained, looking lost. What happens now? Now. I sat back down at my desk. Now you prepare for tomorrow's board meeting. You explain your actions to them. You face the consequences of your choices, and then you step aside and watch as someone competent takes over the company you nearly destroyed. He stood up slowly, his swagger completely gone. I never knew, never suspected. That's the problem, James. You were so busy pretending to be successful that you never learned what success actually means. After he left, I sat alone in my office, reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The modest consulting job that had started as a cover had become something of a sanctuary. The simple lifestyle I'd chosen had protected me from people who only valued wealth and status. In trying to deceive others about my success, I had accidentally built something genuine, a life based on substance rather than appearance. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. I understand now why you never told me. I just wish I had been wise enough to see what was right in front of me. I didn't reply. Some realizations come too late to change anything. The next day, I watched through my secure feed as the board voted to remove James as CEO. His empire of appearances crumbled in a matter of minutes. Sarah, who had once been so impressed by his borrowed success, wasn't there to witness his fall. She had already cleaned out her office and left, another dream shattered by reality. But in the midst of their downfall, I found myself experiencing something unexpected: growth. The anger and bitterness I had carried had transformed into something else: understanding. I understood now that Sarah's betrayal and James's deception weren't just about them. They were reflections of a world that valued the appearance of success over its substance. I decided then that it was time for a change. Not in my lifestyle, that would remain modest and genuine, but in my approach to business. Morrison Technologies would be restructured, not destroyed. The employees who had worked hard and honestly deserved better than to suffer for James's mistakes. As I drafted the restructuring plan, I realized that this experience had changed me. I was no longer the man who felt the need to hide his success or test people's authenticity. I had become someone who understood that true power lies not in what you show the world, but in how you use what you have to make a difference. The revelation of my identity wasn't just a moment of triumph. It was a turning point. Sometimes the greatest growth comes not from achieving success, but from understanding what success truly means. The board meeting that would decide Morrison Technologies' fate was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. I had chosen to attend in person rather than through my usual proxy. It was time to step out of the shadows completely. The company's future and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees deserved that much respect. I arrived early, watching through the security feed as board members filed into the conference room. James arrived last, looking like he'd aged years in just a few days. His usual designer suit had been replaced by something off the rack, and his confident stride was now more of a defeated shuffle. Sarah was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, a surprise I hadn't anticipated. "Mark," she said, stepping forward, "I know I shouldn't be here, but I need to understand everything. I owe myself that much." I studied her for a moment. Gone was the arrogant woman who had dismissed our life together as beneath her. In her place stood someone humbled by reality. "Come with me," I said finally. "You should see this." As we entered the boardroom, the reaction was immediate. Board members who had only known me as Mr. Thompson through proxies stood up, surprise evident on their faces. James, who had been reviewing papers at the end of the table, looked up and went pale. "Good morning," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "For those who don't know me, I'm Mark Davidson. Some of you knew me as Mr. Thompson. Today we're going to have a very honest conversation about this company's future." I gestured for Sarah to take a seat along the wall. She wasn't a board member, but she deserved to witness the unraveling of the illusion that had seduced her. "Mr. Morrison," I began, "would you like to explain to the board why we're here, or should I?" James cleared his throat. I can explain everything. The financial decisions were made in the company's best interest. Were they? I interrupted, sliding folders to each board member. Was it in the company's best interest to authorize personal expenses as business costs? Was it in the company's best interest to issue unauthorized bonuses? Was it in the company's best interest to attempt asset liquidation without board approval? The room fell silent as board members began reviewing the documents. James's face grew increasingly ashen as he realized the extent of the evidence against him. This is just the beginning, I continued. The audit revealed systematic mismanagement and personal enrichment at the company's expense. Mr. Morrison has been using corporate funds to maintain an illusion of success while driving the company toward insolvency. That's not true, James protested, but his voice lacked conviction. The expenses were necessary for maintaining client relationships and employee morale. I pulled out another document. Like the apartment you leased for your mistress using company funds? Was that for client relationships too? Sarah flinched, visibly. Several board members looked between her and James, understanding dawning on their faces. Or perhaps, I continued, you'd like to explain the Dubai expansion, the one you promised to certain employees despite knowing we hadn't secured proper funding or regulatory approval. You blocked the funding, James accused. You deliberately sabotaged the expansion. I prevented you from making promises you couldn't keep with money you didn't have, I corrected him. That's called responsible investment management, something you should have learned before playing CEO. The CFO spoke up. Mr. Davidson, these numbers, the extent of the mismanagement, how did we miss this? Because Mr. Morrison was very good at maintaining appearances, I replied. He understood that people often see what they want to see. Isn't that right, Sarah? All eyes turned to her. She straightened in her chair. Yes, she said quietly. We all saw what we wanted to see. James made one last attempt. The company has grown under my leadership. Our market position. Your market position is artificial, I cut in, built on my investment and maintained through increasingly risky financial decisions. Would you like to explain to the board what happens when my funding stops, when the banks call in their loans, when the truth about your management becomes public? The color drained from his face completely. Board members were now whispering among themselves, the evidence of James's mismanagement impossible to ignore. I move for an immediate vote on new leadership, one board member said. Others quickly seconded the motion. Before we vote, I said, I want to make something clear. This company still has potential. The employees who have worked honestly and diligently deserve a chance to succeed. I'm prepared to maintain my investment and support restructuring, but only under new leadership with proper oversight. The vote was unanimous. James Morrison was removed as CEO, effective immediately. As security arrived to escort him from the building, he turned to me one last time. You planned this, he said. All of it. You let me think I was in control while you waited for the right moment to destroy me. I stood up, facing him directly. No, James, you destroyed yourself. I just chose not to stop you. After he was gone, Sarah approached me. The apartment, you knew about it all along. I knew everything, I replied. Every dinner, every late meeting, every lie. I wanted to see if you would recognize the truth on your own. Tears welled in her eyes. I failed that test spectacularly, didn't I? We both failed, I said quietly. I failed by not trusting you with the truth from the beginning. You failed by not trusting in what we had built together. The board members filed out, leaving us alone in the conference room. Through the windows, we could see James being escorted to his car, a box of personal items in his arms. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now, the company gets restructured, new leadership, new direction, new priorities. As for us, I paused, looking at her directly. That depends on what you've learned from all this. I've learned that I didn't really know what success looked like, she said softly. I thought it was about appearances, status, power. But real success is about building something genuine, isn't it? I nodded. The question is, what will you build now? She wiped her eyes. I don't know. Everything I thought I wanted seems hollow now. Sometimes, I said, gathering my papers, we have to lose everything we thought we wanted to find what we actually need. As I walked out of the boardroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was finally out, the consequences dealt, the lessons learned. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about growth, about understanding what truly matters in life. The question now was whether Sarah had really learned that lesson, or if she was just adapting to her new reality. Only time would tell. The weeks following the dramatic board meeting brought significant changes to both Morrison Technologies and my personal life. The company underwent a complete restructuring under new leadership, while I found myself adjusting to a life without pretense. No more hiding behind modest consulting jobs or proxy representatives. The media had picked up the story, of course. Tech CEOs fall from grace and hidden billionaire reveals identity made headlines in business journals. I declined all interview requests, letting the company's transformation speak for itself. James Morrison, meanwhile, had disappeared from public view, his carefully crafted image of success shattered beyond repair. Sarah had moved in with her sister, a humbling change from the luxury apartment she'd briefly enjoyed. Through mutual friends, I heard she'd taken a junior position at a small marketing firm, a significant step down from her executive aspirations, but perhaps a necessary one for her personal growth. One morning, as I sat in my real office, a penthouse suite downtown that I'd never shown Sarah during our marriage, my assistant brought in an interesting piece of mail. It was a handwritten letter from James's wife, Catherine. Dear Mr. Davidson, it began, I wanted to thank you for exposing the truth about James. While the revelation was painful, it saved me from spending more years living a lie. Your actions, though perhaps not intended for my benefit, gave me the clarity I needed to move forward with my life. I set the letter aside, reflecting on how our actions often have ripple effects we don't anticipate. Catherine had been an unintended beneficiary of my calculated unraveling of James's deceptions. Sometimes truth, however painful, is the greatest gift we can receive. My phone buzzed with a message from the new CEO of Morrison Technologies. Quarterly reports show positive growth, real growth this time. Would you be interested in reviewing our new expansion proposals? I smiled, remembering James's flashy presentations and empty promises. The new leadership team understood that sustainable success comes from solid planning and honest work, not smoke and mirrors. Later that afternoon, I had my driver take me to my old consulting office. I stood outside for a moment, looking at the modest building that had served as my cover for so many years. It had been a kind of sanctuary, a place where I could work in peace without the complications that wealth often brings. As I was about to leave, a familiar figure approached. Sarah. She looked different, more grounded somehow. The designer. Clothes and artificial confidence were gone, replaced by something more authentic. I thought I might find you here, she said. Old habits die hard. Just saying goodbye, I replied. I'm closing this office. No need for it anymore. She nodded, understanding. No more hiding who you are. No more hiding, I confirmed, though I've learned there's a difference between hiding and choosing privacy. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before she spoke again. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Mark, about success, about authenticity, about what really matters in life. And what have you concluded? That I was chasing a reflection, an illusion. What I had with you, what I threw away. That was real. It wasn't flashy or exciting, but it was genuine. She paused, gathering courage. I miss that. I miss us. I studied her face, seeing the sincerity there, but also remembering the contempt she'd shown for our life together. The problem, Sarah, is that you didn't miss us until you knew who I really was. Would you be standing here if I were really just a modest financial consultant? She flinched but held her ground. I deserve that, but I've learned my lesson. The hard way, yes, but I've learned it. The Sarah who left you for James, I don't even recognize her anymore. People don't change that easily, I said quietly. The values that led you to make those choices, they don't disappear just because the consequences were painful. No, they don't, she agreed. But they can evolve. I'm not asking for reconciliation. Mark, I know I destroyed that possibility. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What we had was worth more than all the false success in the world. I nodded, appreciating her honesty, but maintaining my distance. What will you do now? Build something real, she said. Starting from the bottom, learning properly, no shortcuts. My new job isn't glamorous, but it's honest work. For the first time in my life, I'm earning everything I get. We talked for a while longer about life, about lessons learned, about the future. It was a different kind of conversation than we'd ever had during our marriage, more honest, more grounded in reality. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street, Sarah turned to leave. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching me what real success looks like, even if I had to lose everything to understand the lesson." I watched her walk away, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The anger and bitterness that had driven my calculated revenge had faded, replaced by something closer to wisdom. Success, I had learned, isn't just about what you achieve. It's about how you achieve it and who you become in the process. That evening, sitting in my penthouse office, I reviewed the latest proposals from Morrison Technologies. The company was growing again, this time built on a foundation of genuine value and honest work. The employees who had weathered the storm were more committed than ever, understanding now that true success comes from building something real. My phone buzzed with a message from my financial team. New investment opportunity, promising tech, startup, solid fundamentals, ethical leadership. Interested? I smiled, realizing that while my methods of operating might have changed, my core principles remained the same. Success isn't about appearing successful. It's about creating real value, building genuine relationships, and maintaining your integrity even when no one's watching. The sun set over the city skyline, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. From my window, I could see the lights coming on in offices across the city, thousands of people working, striving, building their own versions of success. Some would learn the hard way, as Sarah had, that appearances are fleeting. Others would understand, as I had, that true success leaves a legacy of substance, not just style. 2 months after the dust had settled at Morrison Technologies, I received an intriguing email from an anonymous source. The subject line read, "There's more to James Morrison's story than you know." Normally, I would have dismissed such a mysterious message, but something about the sender's detailed knowledge of internal company matters caught my attention. The email contained encrypted documents that, once decoded by my security team, revealed a web of connections I hadn't anticipated. James Morrison, it seemed, hadn't been working alone in his deceptions. There was a larger scheme at play, one that extended beyond our company and into several other tech firms in the region. "Sir," my head of security reported, "we've found evidence of a coordinated effort. Morrison was just a pawn in a larger game. Someone was using him to position themselves for a hostile takeover of multiple tech companies, including ours." I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. "Who? That's the interesting part," he replied, pulling up more documents on my screen. "The trail leads to Victor Chen, CEO of Global Innovation Corp. He's been systematically targeting companies with similar profiles to Morrison Technologies. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Victor Chen, Sarah's former boss from her first job out of college. The connection couldn't be coincidental. I had my team dig deeper, and the picture that emerged was fascinating. Chen had been orchestrating a complex scheme, identifying promising tech companies, planting operators like James Morrison in leadership positions, and then using their inevitable failures to acquire the companies at bargain prices. The evidence showed that Chen had approached James 3 years ago, offering to mentor him and invest secretly in Morrison Technologies. James, eager for success and validation, had jumped at the opportunity. What he didn't realize was that he was being set up to fail from the start. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "I need to tell you something important. It's about Victor Chen." I arranged to meet her at a quiet cafe downtown. When she arrived, she looked nervous but determined. "I should have told you this sooner," she began, "but I didn't connect the dots until recently." Victor Chen approached me about a job last week. He knew everything about what happened with James and the company. He offered me a position, said he could help me rebuild my career. "And what did you tell him?" I asked, studying her reaction. "I turned him down," she replied firmly. Something felt off about the whole thing. Then I started remembering things from my time working for him years ago, patterns I didn't recognize then, but see clearly now. She pulled out her phone and showed me emails from her time at Chen's company. They revealed a similar pattern. Chen identifying promising employees, manipulating them with promises of success and mentorship, then using them in his corporate schemes. James wasn't the first, Sarah continued. Victor has been doing this for years. He finds people who are hungry for success, people who will do anything to prove themselves. He uses their ambition against them. The pieces were falling into place. Chen had likely identified Morrison Technologies as a target years ago. He had positioned James as CEO, knowing his weak character and desire for status would make him easy to manipulate. Sarah's involvement had probably been an unexpected bonus, another way to destabilize the company from within. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to my financial team. Begin full investigation into Victor Chen and Global Innovation Corp. Priority level highest. There's more, Sarah said quietly. I found old documents from my time at Chen's company. He's been building a network of compromised executives across the tech industry. James wasn't just failing on his own. He was being actively sabotaged. This revelation cast everything in a new light. James's increasingly risky decisions, his desperate attempts to maintain appearances, his misuse of company funds. How much had been his own failings, and how much had been orchestrated by Chen? "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked Sarah. She met my eyes steadily, because I've learned the hard way what real integrity looks like. And because I think Victor Chen needs to be stopped before he destroys more companies and more lives. I spent the next few days reviewing everything we knew about Chen's operations. The pattern was clever. He would identify companies with strong fundamentals but vulnerable leadership. Then he would insert his own people or manipulate existing executives, creating internal chaos that would drive down company value. Finally, he would swoop in through various shell companies to acquire the weakened businesses. My phone rang. It was Catherine, James's ex-wife. "Mr. Davidson, I found something you need to see. Documents James kept hidden in our house. They show regular payments from offshore accounts linked to Victor Chen." The web was expanding, revealing a conspiracy larger than any of us had imagined. James hadn't just been a failed CEO, he had been a planted agent in a corporate takeover scheme. And Sarah, in her ambition and discontent, had unknowingly played right into Chen's hands. I called an emergency meeting with my security team and financial advisors. It was time to turn the tables on Victor Chen. He had orchestrated the near destruction of Morrison Technologies, but in doing so, he had left a trail of evidence that could bring down his entire operation. As I prepared to confront this new challenge, I realized that sometimes the greatest threats aren't the ones we can see, but the invisible hands guiding events from the shadows. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't just fighting to protect my company. I was fighting to expose a system of corporate manipulation that threatened the entire industry. The stage was set for a new battle, one that would require all the cunning and resources I possessed. Victor Chen had played a long game, but he was about to learn that he wasn't the only one who knew how to operate from the shadows. The confrontation with Victor Chen played out like a high-stakes chess match, each move carefully calculated and precisely executed. I had learned from my experience with James Morrison that sometimes the most effective strategy isn't a direct attack, but rather a systematic dismantling of someone's carefully constructed world. First, I had my team quietly acquire significant positions in several of Chen's target companies through various shell corporations. While he had been focused on manipulating smaller tech firms, I had been building a network of allies among his potential victims. "Sir," my head of security reported one morning, "we've identified 12 companies in Chen's acquisition pipeline. He's using the same playbook he tried with Morrison Technologies." I nodded, reviewing the files. "And the executives he's compromised?" "We've compiled complete dossiers. Most are like Morrison, ambitious but weak-willed, easily manipulated by promises of wealth and status. The evidence we gathered was damning. Chen had created an elaborate network of corporate manipulation using compromised executives as pawns in his takeover schemes. The pattern was always the same: identify promising companies, infiltrate their leadership, create internal chaos, then acquire them at depressed valuations. Sarah proved invaluable in unraveling Chen's operation. Her previous experience working for him provided insights that helped us understand his methods. "He always operates the same way," she explained during one of our strategy sessions. "He finds people's weaknesses, usually ambition or insecurity, and exploits them. He made James believe he was a brilliant CEO while setting him up to fail." I received an unexpected call from James Morrison himself. He was living in a small apartment now, his fortune and reputation destroyed. "I want to help," he said, his voice lacking its former confidence. "I was blind, but I see everything clearly now. Chen used me, used all of us. The pieces were falling into place. Through careful coordination with regulatory authorities and other victims of Chen's schemes, we built an airtight case. But rather than moving immediately, I decided to let Chen make one final move. As expected, he reached out through intermediaries, offering to help Morrison Technologies recover from its recent troubles. His proposal was exactly what we had anticipated: a low-ball acquisition offer disguised as a strategic partnership. I arranged to meet him personally at his office. Victor Chen was exactly as Sarah had described him, impeccably dressed, radiating confidence and success, the kind of success that exists only on the surface. "Mr. Davidson," he smiled, extending his hand, "or should I say Mr. Thompson, your revelation caused quite a stir in our industry. Did it surprise you?" I asked, studying his reaction. "Or did it interfere with your plans for my company?" His smile flickered slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean. I'm simply offering assistance to a company." In transition, I placed a thick folder on his desk. "Like the assistance you offered these other companies? Or the mentorship you provided to James Morrison?" As he flipped through the documents, I saw the first crack in his composed facade. The folder contained detailed evidence of his entire operation: the shell companies, the compromised executives, the manipulated acquisitions. "This is quite a fantasy you've constructed," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Your mistake, Victor, was thinking you were the only one who knew how to operate from the shadows. While you were playing your games with pawns like Morrison, I was watching, learning, and building a case." I pulled out my phone and showed him live feeds from various news websites. Stories were breaking simultaneously across multiple business journals. Tech industry manipulation scheme exposed. Corporate raiders empire built on deception. SEC launches investigation into Global Innovation Corp. Chen's face went pale. "You can't prove anything." "I already have," I replied calmly. "Your former puppets are turning on you. James Morrison, Catherine, even those executives you thought were still loyal. They're all talking. But here's what's really going to destroy you. The money trail. My team has traced every payment, every shell company, every manipulated transaction." He leaned back in his chair, his empire crumbling before his eyes. "What do you want?" "Nothing," I said, standing up. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy call to let you know it's over. The authorities are already moving on your assets." As if on cue, we heard commotion outside his office. Federal agents were arriving, armed with warrants and evidence. We had helped compile. I left Chen to face the consequences of his actions, but not before delivering one final message. "You taught me something important, Victor. Success built on deception eventually collapses under its own weight." The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Chen's empire crumbled as investigations revealed the full scope of his schemes. Morrison Technologies, now under proper leadership, emerged stronger than ever, as did the other companies he had targeted. Sarah called me the day Chen was indicted. "I keep thinking about how easily I could have been another one of his pawns," she said. "He almost had me, just like he had James." "The difference is, you learned," I replied. "Some people never do." In the end, the exposure of Chen's operation led to significant reforms in corporate governance across the tech industry. Companies began paying closer attention to their leadership appointments and acquisition patterns. As for me, I maintained my position as a major investor in Morrison Technologies, but now operating openly rather than through proxies. The company flourished under its new leadership, built on a foundation of transparency and genuine value creation. Sarah and I maintained a cordial relationship, bound by our shared experience, but separated by the lessons we had learned from it. She found success on her own terms, building a small but respected marketing consultancy that emphasized ethical business practices. James Morrison, surprisingly, found redemption in helping other executives avoid the traps he had fallen into. His cautionary tale became a case study in business schools, teaching future leaders about the dangers of valuing appearance over substance. The experience taught me that true success isn't just about making the right investments or strategic decisions. It's about maintaining integrity even when operating in the shadows, about using power responsibly, and about recognizing that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying our opponents, but from exposing the truth. As I sat in my office, watching the sun set over the city skyline, I reflected on how far we had all come. Chen's schemes had inadvertently led to positive change, forcing the industry to confront its darker aspects and emerge stronger. Success, I had learned, comes in many forms, but the most lasting success is built on a foundation of truth, even when that truth takes time to emerge from the shadows. 5 years after the Chen investigation, I sat in my penthouse office reviewing an unusual document that had just landed on my desk. It was a detailed report from my private investigator, containing information that would reshape everything I thought I knew about the events that had unfolded. "Sir," my assistant called through the intercom, "Sarah's here to see you. She says it's urgent." I glanced at the report again, then at the security feed showing Sarah in reception. She looked different, poised but anxious, clutching what appeared to be an old leather portfolio. "Send her in." Sarah entered, and I noticed immediately that she was carrying her father's old briefcase, the one he'd used during his years as a corporate lawyer before his passing. "Mark, we need to talk." It's about Victor Chen and my father. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the report sitting heavily between us. I know, I said quietly, the truth about who really orchestrated everything. Her eyes widened. You found out that your father was the original architect of Chen's corporate takeover strategies? That before his death, he had created the entire framework Chen later used? I opened the report. What I don't understand is why you never told me. Sarah placed her father's briefcase on my desk with trembling hands. Because I only discovered it myself 3 months ago. Going through his old files, I found these. She pulled out a stack of yellowed documents. My father, he wasn't just Chen's mentor. He was the mastermind behind a decades-long plan to reshape the entire tech industry. The documents revealed an astounding truth. Sarah's father, Robert Walsh, had spent years developing an elaborate scheme to consolidate control of emerging tech companies. Chen hadn't been the puppet master. He'd been the puppet, carrying out a dead man's grand design. There's more, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. My father knew about you, Mark. Long before I met you, he had identified Morrison Technologies as a target years ago. Our meeting, it wasn't an accident. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. What are you saying? Our entire relationship was orchestrated. My father arranged for us to meet. Knowing you were the hidden investor behind Morrison Technologies, she paused, fighting back tears. He groomed me to play a specific role without ever telling me. Chen was just following the script my father had written years before. I sat back, memories realigning themselves with this new reality. The night we met, the charity gala. My father had insisted I attend. He knew you would be there. Sarah opened another file. Everything was planned. My career path, my position at Morrison Technologies, even my eventual involvement with James. It was all part of my father's strategy to create the perfect corporate takeover scenario. The irony was staggering. While I had been proud of maintaining my secret identity, I had been an unwitting player in a much larger game. But why? What was the ultimate goal? Sarah pulled out one final document, her father's personal letter, to her, dated just before his death. He wanted to expose the fundamental flaws in corporate America, the ease with which companies could be manipulated, the way ambition could blind people to truth. It was all an elaborate lesson. He wanted the industry to learn. And Chen, did he know he was just executing another man's plan? No, Sarah replied. Chen thought he was the mastermind. My father knew his ego would make him the perfect unwitting agent of change. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. So even my revenge against Chen was part of the plan. Your father anticipated everything, including my response to betrayal. Not everything, Sarah said softly. He didn't anticipate one thing, that I would actually fall in love with you. That wasn't part of the script. I turned back to face her. And now, why reveal all this after 5 years? Because there's one last part of my father's plan that needs to be addressed. She handed me a final document, a proposal for a revolutionary corporate governance system designed to prevent the very kind of manipulation her father had orchestrated. He called it his redemption project, his way of fixing what he had helped break. The proposal was brilliant, a combination of technological innovation and regulatory reform that could transform corporate oversight. It was as if Robert Walsh had created the disease just to ensure the cure would be embraced. There's something else you should know, Sarah added, her voice steady now. My father left controlling interest in 7 major tech companies to a trust that becomes active only when both you and I agree to implement his governance system together. The magnitude of the revelation was overwhelming. Robert Walsh hadn't just orchestrated a complex corporate manipulation, he had created A path to fundamental reform, using his own daughter and me as unwitting agents of change. So everything, our marriage, its breakdown, Chen's involvement, even our current success, it was all designed to bring us to this moment, I asked. Yes, Sarah replied. My father believed that only people who had experienced both sides of corporate manipulation could be trusted to implement real change. I looked at the proposal again, understanding flooding through me. He created the perfect storm to teach us the perfect lesson. The question is, Sarah said quietly, what do we do with that lesson? I sat back down at my desk, the weight of the decision heavy in the air between us. Everything I had built, every move I had made, had been part of someone else's grand design. Yet somehow that made the choice ahead clearer than ever. We do what your father couldn't, I said finally. We fix the system, but we do it our way. Not as pawns in someone else's game, but as people who have learned the true cost of corporate manipulation firsthand. Sarah smiled, and for the first time in years, I saw the woman I had first fallen in love with, not the ambitious executive or the humbled ex-wife, but someone genuine and real. Together? She asked. Together, I confirmed, but this time with complete honesty. As we began reviewing the proposal, I realized that sometimes the greatest revelations aren't about uncovering deception, but about discovering purpose. Robert Walsh had orchestrated an elaborate game of corporate chess, but in doing so, he had created something unprecedented, a chance for real, lasting change. The sun set over the city skyline, casting long shadows across my office. Sarah and I worked late into the night, planning how to implement her father's vision while making it our own. Sometimes I realized the most important success isn't what we achieve, but what we choose to do with the truth once we finally understand it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.